I've been driving long-haul trucks across America's highways for many years. During the day, the roads feel completely normal. Cars, semi-trucks, gas stations, and people are everywhere. But the moment the sun goes down, everything changes. The darkness becomes so deep that beyond the reach of your headlights, there's nothing but blackness. At times, it feels as if the highway itself is alive, just waiting for night to fall. Every experienced truck driver knows that feeling. Very few ever talk about it, because some things are almost impossible to put into words. My first truly terrifying experience happened on the lonely stretch of US Route 6 in Nevada. It was the last week of October. Around 2 a.m., a cold desert wind drifted through my slightly open window, brushing against my face. I was hauling a trailer loaded with canned food, heading east across Nevada. After hours behind the wheel, exhaustion was starting to catch up with me. My eyelids felt incredibly heavy. Every few seconds, it seemed like they wanted to close on their own. To stay awake, I kept the radio playing softly and let the cold air hit my face. Then, at the very edge of my headlights, I saw a woman standing on the shoulder of the highway. She was wearing a light blue dress, with both arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if she were trying to keep warm against the freezing desert night. When I first saw her, I wasn't scared. I was confused. There wasn't a single parked car for miles. No houses, no lights, no sign that another person had been anywhere nearby. So how had she ended up alone on that deserted highway? I cautiously eased off the accelerator and slowed the truck down. As I got closer, my headlights illuminated her face. That's when I noticed something even stranger. She wasn't looking at me. She wasn't even looking at my truck. Her eyes were fixed on the darkness behind me, as if she were waiting for the headlights of a very specific vehicle to appear. There was a deep sadness in her expression, a look of endless waiting, and somehow, that unsettled me far more than if she had simply been staring. I immediately looked in the same direction she was staring. I glanced into my rearview mirror, certain that another vehicle had to be coming. But there was nothing. Just my trailer, and an endless wall of darkness stretching behind it. Not a single pair of headlights. I turned my eyes back to the road ahead. My hands froze on the steering wheel. The woman was gone. She hadn't walked off the road. She hadn't disappeared into the desert. She wasn't running anywhere. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. Panic hit me. I slammed on the brakes. The roar of my truck and trailer echoed across the empty desert highway. I searched every inch of the roadside in my headlights. Nothing. No footprints, no movement, no sign that anyone had ever been there. Just me and the endless silence of the Nevada night. Telling myself it was nothing more than exhaustion. After driving for hours without sleep, your mind can start playing tricks on your eyes. That's what I chose to believe. So I put the truck back in gear and continued down the highway. But now, my hands were gripping the steering wheel tighter than ever. My heart refused to slow down, and every few seconds, my eyes drifted back to the rearview mirror. About 20 miles later, I spotted a small truck stop in the distance. It wasn't much, just an old roadside diner, 2 fuel pumps, and a gravel parking lot. On that lonely desert highway, it looked like the safest place in the world. I let out a quiet sigh of relief, parked my semi, and headed straight inside the diner.
Was filled with the soft glow of yellow lights. Behind the counter stood an elderly man whose deeply lined face suggested he had spent most of his life in that lonely place. The moment I sat down on a stool, he quietly placed a steaming cup of coffee in front of me, without asking what I wanted. Then he looked me straight in the eyes and calmly asked, "Did you see something on Route 6 tonight?" The words sent a chill through my entire body. I hadn't told him a single thing, not one word. For a few moments, I just stared at him in silence. Then I told him everything. About the woman in the light blue dress, the sadness in her eyes, and the way she kept staring into the darkness, as if she had been waiting for someone who never came.
Hearing my story, the old man's face showed no surprise. He simply nodded slowly, as if he already knew exactly what I was talking about. He pushed the coffee cup closer to me and said in a quiet voice, "You're not the first driver to see her." Then he told me about a terrible accident that had happened on that same road many decades ago. In the late 1970s, a woman was driving home through a violent storm. Heavy rain and dangerous road conditions caused her car to leave the highway on a sharp turn. Her husband was following behind in another vehicle, but somewhere along the way, they became separated. He searched for her, but he couldn't find her in time. That night, the woman never made it home. The old man lowered his voice and said, "Ever since then, many people have seen her standing in that same spot. She always appears wearing a light blue dress, with her arms wrapped tightly around herself, staring at the lights coming from the road behind her, as if she is still waiting for those headlights, the ones that never arrived in time that night." He also told me that the woman had never harmed anyone. She simply stands there, quietly waiting. I sat there silently, holding the coffee cup in my hands. And that night, I finally understood something. Some places are not just roads. Some places hold unfinished stories. Stories that remain trapped there forever. Morning was beginning to break. Soft light started coming through the windows of the truck stop. I finished the last sip of my coffee and walked back outside toward my truck. After that night, I drove through many states. I covered thousands of miles, but that image never left my mind. Many times I tried to convince myself that it was just exhaustion. Maybe the darkness and isolation had played tricks on my mind. But when a complete stranger already knew the story of the same woman, I had no explanation left. Even today, whenever someone asks me about driving on lonely highways at night, I remember that woman in the blue dress. Some things can be forgotten if you try hard enough, but some memories stay with you forever.
The second story is about my friend Dale. I've known him for nearly 20 years, and he's the kind of person who never makes things up without a reason. He's quiet by nature and has always been known as someone who tells the truth. He never believed in ghosts or unexplained events. So when he told me what happened to him, I knew something had occurred that even he couldn't understand. That night, Dale was driving through the mountain roads of West Virginia with a trailer loaded with timber. Dense forests surrounded him. Mountains rose above the road, and deep valleys dropped below. Around midnight, a thick fog suddenly covered the entire area. It became so heavy that even the beam of his headlights disappeared into the darkness after only a short distance.
Dale told me that he could barely see the white line along the road. He was driving extremely slowly, with both hands firmly gripping the steering wheel. Then, through the thick fog, he saw a man standing on the side of the road. The man was wearing old-fashioned clothing,
a heavy canvas coat, and a flat cap on his head. The strangest thing was the way he moved. He was dragging one leg as he limped forward. Dale immediately became concerned. How could someone be walking on such a dangerous mountain road in those conditions? He slowed the truck down, rolled down the window, and called out, "Do you need help?" The man slowly stopped and turned toward the truck. There was something unusual in his eyes, a deep exhaustion, and a sadness that was hard to explain. The man slowly walked up to the truck and said in a heavy voice, "Could you take me down the mountain?" Dale hesitated for a moment. He normally never allowed strangers into his truck, but the weather outside was dangerous. The fog was thick. A deep drop-off ran along one side of the road. He thought that if he refused to help, the man might end up in an accident. So, after a moment of hesitation, he opened the door. The man slowly climbed into the cab and sat in the passenger seat. As soon as he got inside, Dale noticed a strange smell, like wet earth, cold air, and fresh-cut wood shavings. The man didn't say another word. He simply stared out at the thick fog covering the mountainside. For a while, the only sounds inside the truck were the rumble of the engine and the wind howling outside. Trying to make the atmosphere less uncomfortable, Dale started a conversation. He asked, "What are you doing up on this mountain at this hour?" The man stayed silent for a few moments. Then, in a low voice, he replied, "I worked at the old sawmill here many years ago. There was an accident. A huge pile of timber suddenly collapsed. Since then, I've been trying to make my way down this mountain." Dale felt uneasy hearing those words. He thought maybe the man was in shock, or perhaps he was confused and didn't remember things clearly. He decided not to ask any more questions and kept his eyes focused on the road. Outside, the fog remained so thick that the road was barely visible.
The truck began making its way down the mountain. After a while, the road became slightly straighter, and the thick fog surrounding them started to disappear. Then suddenly, the man spoke. "Stop here. I'll get out here." Dale pulled the truck over to the side of the road and kept the engine running. He turned toward the passenger seat with a small smile, ready to say goodbye. But the next moment, his expression changed to pure fear. The passenger seat was empty. The man was gone. Dale immediately looked toward the door, but the door was still locked from the inside. He hadn't heard anyone get out. He hadn't felt any movement after the truck stopped. There was only one thing left on the seat, a layer of fine wood dust, lying exactly where the man had been.
Sat there for a long time, staring at the empty passenger seat. Only one question kept running through his mind. Where had that man gone? He stopped the truck and looked around, but outside there was nothing. Just the deserted road and a thin layer of fog drifting through the mountains. That same night, Dale called me. The fear in his voice wasn't the fear of someone telling a scary story. It was the fear of someone who had witnessed something with his own eyes, something that had no explanation. Even after he got home, Dale couldn't forget what happened. He started researching the history of that old mountain road and the abandoned sawmill. After some time, he discovered something disturbing. There really had been an old sawmill there many decades ago, and a worker had died in a timber accident at that very
information
place.
Dale found only made him more disturbed. The records also mentioned that the worker who died in that accident had suffered an old injury that made walking difficult. He walked with a limp, exactly the same way Dale had seen that man walking on the road that night. But the strangest part was what the man had said.
that he was still trying to make his way down the mountain. After that incident, Dale never told the story in front of crowds. He never mentioned it at truck stops, and he never used it as a joke. He simply told me what happened, and then stayed silent. Even today, whenever someone mentions that mountain road, the same fear appears in Dale's eyes, the same fear that was on his face that night.
The third incident is for my own life, and perhaps this is the one that disturbed me the most. Because in the other incidents, there was at least a face, a story, something I could try to understand. But this time, there was nothing, only an event that still has no explanation to this day. That night, I was driving my truck on a lonely highway in West Texas. The area was so empty that for miles there were no houses, no stores, and no other vehicles in sight. All around me were dark fields, dry trees, and a massive sky filled with stars. I knew that road very well, but that night my body was completely exhausted, and all I wanted was to find a place to rest as soon as possible.
Watching the mile markers, waiting for the rest area where I often stopped. My eyes were getting heavier, and my body was begging for rest. Then my GPS announced, "Rest area 1 mile ahead." A few moments later, a blue sign appeared in my headlights with the rest area symbol. Seeing it brought me a sense of relief. I slowed the truck down and turned onto the entrance road. Inside, there was an old brick building, a restroom in the center, vending machines glowing outside, and a few worn-out picnic tables along the side. There was another truck parked in the lot, its lights turned off. Everything looked completely normal. I parked my truck and stepped outside.
I turned off the truck engine. I noticed the silence around me. It wasn't the normal quietness of a night. It was the kind of silence that felt like the entire place was holding its breath. No wind, no insects, not even the distant sound of another vehicle. I stepped down to stretch my tired legs and walked toward the restroom. As soon as I entered, I noticed the flickering lights above me. They kept turning on and off like a slow, steady heartbeat. I stood in front of the sink and looked into the mirror while washing my hands. Then my eyes caught something in the reflection, the open doorway behind me, and standing there was a man. He was completely still, silent, just staring directly at me. I turned around immediately, but there was no one behind me. The doorway was empty. The entire restroom was exactly as deserted as before. No footsteps, no sound of anyone leaving. My heart was pounding. Without wasting another second, I decided to get out of there and walked straight back to my truck. The moment I got inside the cab, I locked all the doors. I kept telling myself that maybe it was just exhaustion, a trick caused by lack of sleep. After all, I had been driving for hours without a proper break. A short while later, fatigue pulled me into a deep sleep. But when I woke up the next morning, what I saw changed the way I looked at that night forever. The rest area was gone. There was no building, no restroom, no vending machines, nothing. Only the empty highway and my truck sitting there.
If you enjoyed this terrifying journey, subscribe to Mr. Nightmare 2.0 and become part of our growing horror community. Sweet dreams, if you can sleep.